In 1815, a man in London knew the outcome of the most important battle in Europe before the British government did. What he did with that information became one of the most repeated and most exaggerated stories in financial history. But behind the legend was something far more interesting than the myth: a family of 5 brothers who built the first truly international banking network in history, using war as their business model. This is the story of the Rothschild family, not the conspiracy theories, the actual history, which is strange enough on its own. The story begins in the Frankfurt ghetto in 1744. Jewish families in the Holy Roman Empire faced severe legal restrictions. They couldn't own land, couldn't join most guilds, and were confined to specific neighborhoods. One of the few professions open to them was finance. A boy named Mayor Amschel Rothschild, orphaned young, was pushed into an apprenticeship at a banking house. He started small, trading rare coins and antiques. But Mayer had a talent for one thing in particular: building relationships with powerful people who needed money quietly managed. He became a court agent for a powerful German prince, one of the few official positions available to a Jewish businessman in that era. It was a foothold. Mayer used it carefully. Mayer had 5 sons. And he made a decision that would define the family for the next 2 centuries. Instead of keeping them all in Frankfurt, he sent them out. One son stayed in Frankfurt. The others were sent to London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples, 5 brothers, in 5 of Europe's most important financial centers, all working as one coordinated business. This network was built at the worst possible time for ordinary commerce and the best possible time for the Rothschilds. The Napoleonic Wars were tearing Europe apart. When the war reached the prince Mayer worked for, the prince had to flee and entrusted part of his fortune to Mayer for safekeeping. It was an enormous act of trust, and the Rothschilds protected it carefully. War, it turned out, was extraordinarily profitable for bankers who knew how to move money safely and quickly. Armies needed financing, governments needed loans, and someone needed to manage it all without the funds being seized or stolen along the way. The brothers built something revolutionary: a private courier network, faster and more reliable than most governments' own communication systems. Letters and instructions moved between the 5 cities faster than news traveled through official channels. In an era when information was money, the Rothschilds simply had better information, faster. One of the middle sons arrived in England in 1798. He started in textiles, but quickly pivoted toward something far more lucrative: finance. By 1810, he had founded his own banking house in London. And as the wars against Napoleon escalated, the British government desperately needed a way to get gold to its allied armies on the continent without it being intercepted. The Rothschilds took on the job. Using their network of contacts and couriers, they moved British gold across hostile territory to pay the armies fighting Napoleon, a logistical feat almost no one else could have managed. This made the Rothschilds essential to the British war effort, and it made them very, very wealthy. Now, to the legend. In June 1815, one decisive battle would finally end Napoleon's rule. The story, repeated for 2 centuries, claims one of the brothers in London received news of the British victory before the British government itself, using the family's private courier network. According to the legend, he walked onto the London Stock Exchange and began quietly selling, making it look like Britain had lost. Other traders panicked and sold too, crashing prices. Then, the story goes, he secretly bought everything back at rock-bottom prices, just before the real news of victory arrived, making a fortune as prices then soared. It's a fantastic story. It's also, according to most historians, largely a myth. Historical research has found little solid evidence that this exact scheme happened as described. The legend appears to have grown over decades, partly from rival bankers, partly from anti-Semitic pamphlets written specifically to vilify the family, and partly because it was simply a great story. What is documented is something almost as remarkable, without needing exaggeration. The family likely did receive news of the victory early, through their network, and they did profit enormously from the financial aftermath of the wars, through entirely legitimate, if extraordinarily well-positioned, business dealings. After Napoleon's defeat, European governments needed to rebuild, and needed money to do it. The family had exactly what was needed: capital, trust across multiple nations, and a reputation for reliability that money alone couldn't buy. The family became the primary financiers of government debt across Europe, issuing bonds for Britain, Austria, Prussia, and others. When a government needed to borrow money on a massive scale, it often went to them first. Their reach expanded far beyond government loans. They financed railways across Europe, funded mining operations, and built one of the first truly diversified industrial financial empires. In 1875, the family played a pivotal role in one of the most strategically important deals of the century, a massive loan that allowed the British government to purchase a controlling stake in a vital trade canal, securing Britain's most important shipping route. By the mid-1800s, the family had become, by many estimates, the wealthiest private family in the world, controlling a financial network that no government could easily match. And with that wealth came something darker. As the most visible and successful Jewish family in Europe, they became a central target of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, accused of secretly controlling governments, starting wars, and manipulating world events from the shadows. These theories had no factual basis, but they spread for generations, repeated, recycled, and updated for new eras, becoming some of the most persistent anti-Semitic myths in modern history. It's worth separating the two stories clearly. The real history, Five Brothers, a private courier network, a genuinely innovative international banking system, is fascinating enough on its own. It doesn't need conspiracy to be remarkable. What this family actually pioneered was something we now take completely for granted: international finance. A bank that operated across borders, in multiple currencies, with information flowing faster than any government could manage. Every multinational financial institution that exists today, every bank with offices in multiple countries, every firm that manages international government debt, operates on a model essentially invented in the early 1800s. The family's influence persisted for generations. Descendants became members of parliament, philanthropists, scientists, and patrons of the arts across Europe. Much of their wealth over time funded hospitals, museums, scientific research, and public institutions still in use today. What makes this story genuinely useful to understand isn't the myth. It's the underlying lesson. In moments of chaos, war, regime change, uncertainty, the people who control the flow of information and capital often emerge with more power than the people fighting the actual battles. This pattern hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed form. Today's version of the private courier network is a fiber optic cable and a microsecond trading algorithm. The basic principle is identical. Whoever has the fastest, most reliable information moves first, and profits before everyone else even understands what happened. Modern wars still create the same financial dynamics exploited 2 centuries ago. Defense contractors, commodity traders, and reconstruction financiers consistently emerge from conflict in stronger positions than before it began. And the conspiracy theories haven't disappeared either. The same basic narrative, a hidden family or group secretly controlling world events through finance, gets recycled for new targets, in new generations, almost on schedule. which is perhaps the most important lesson of all. The real history of wealth and power is usually complicated, gradual, and built on genuine skill, timing, and risk. The conspiracy version is simpler and far more dangerous because it's almost always wrong and almost always aimed at someone vulnerable. 5 brothers, sent from a cramped ghetto in Frankfurt to the financial capitals of Europe, built something that outlasted Napoleon, outlasted the wars that made them wealthy, and outlasted nearly every government they once financed. Not through secret control of world events, through information, coordination, and a willingness to operate across borders other people saw as barriers. That's a less dramatic story than the legend. It also happens to be true and arguably more impressive, because no myth was required to make it remarkable. It started with a boy trading coins in a ghetto where his family wasn't even allowed to own land. It ended with a financial network that helped finance the defeat of the most powerful military commander in Europe, and shaped how international finance has worked ever since. War made this family's fortune, but it was never really about the battles. It was about who controlled the money that made the battles possible, and who was left standing financially once the smoke cleared. That question didn't end with Napoleon. It is, in many ways, still the question that defines who holds power in any crisis, historical or modern. The family name comes from a red shield that once hung outside a house in Frankfurt. Centuries later, it became shorthand, sometimes fairly, often unfairly, for the entire idea of hidden financial power. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere between the myth and the dismissal, genuinely influential, genuinely innovative, and far more constrained by ordinary business risk than any legend gives it credit for. If you made it this far, leave a comment. What other historical legends do you think deserve a closer, fact-checked look? Some families build fortunes through luck. Others through war, timing, and an unmatched ability to move information faster than anyone else. This family didn't need a conspiracy. They had something rarer, a head start across 5 cities, and brothers who never stopped writing to each other.